Ask a rookie what wheelbase means and they'll recite the textbook definition without missing a beat. Ask a driver with 20 years on the road the same question and watch them pause, get a strange look on their face, and start telling you about a loading dock at 4 in the morning instead. Somewhere between that clean diagram in the CDL manual and the way a 60-foot rig actually moves through a real intersection sits an entire education no classroom has ever managed to teach. If you think off-tracking is just a formula you memorize once and move on from, wait until you hear what happens when the textbook's clean geometry meets a light pole nobody accounted for. And if you want the real story behind the skills that separate rookies from veterans, stick around and subscribe, because that's exactly what we dig into. So tell me in the comments, what's the moment that taught you the difference between knowing something and actually feeling it behind the wheel? Why does the same wheelbase number behave differently in the rain than it does on a dry summer afternoon? And can any amount of technology actually replace that instinct? Wheelbase sounds like the most boring topic imaginable until you understand what it actually controls. It is not just a measurement. It is the single biggest factor determining how a truck turns, how it tracks through a curve, and how far the rear of that trailer swings out when the front end commits to a corner. A short wheelbase turns tight and reacts fast. A long wheelbase turns wide and reacts slow. Neither one is better in some absolute sense. They are simply different tools built for different jobs, and the drivers who understand that difference in their bones, not just on paper, are the ones who never end up explaining a dented fender to their dispatcher. Here is where the textbook starts to fall apart. Every CDL manual teaches something called off-tracking, the tendency of the rear wheels to follow a tighter path than the front wheels during a turn. The formula exists. The diagram exists. Students memorize it, pass the test, and drive away with a number in their head. But a diagram on a page cannot show you what off-tracking actually feels like when you are threading a 53-foot trailer between a parked delivery van and a light pole with maybe 18 inches of margin on either side. That gap between knowing the concept and feeling the geometry in real time is exactly where veteran drivers separate themselves from everyone else on the road. The physics behind it is not complicated once someone breaks it down properly. When a truck enters a turn, the front axle follows the path the driver steers. The rear axle, however, does not follow that same arc. It cuts inside it. The longer the wheelbase, the more pronounced that inward cut becomes, because the rear wheels have a longer lever arm working against them before they catch up to the front end's new direction. On a tractor-trailer combination, this effect compounds twice, once between the tractor's front and rear axles, and again between the tractor and the trailer itself. Add those two effects together, and you get a rear trailer axle that can end up several feet closer to the inside of a curve than the driver's own seat position would suggest. This is exactly why textbook training only gets a new driver partway there. A classroom can teach the theory of off-tracking in an afternoon. It cannot teach a driver to instinctively feel where their trailer tires are sitting relative to a curb they cannot see from the cab. That instinct only comes from thousands of repetitions, close calls, and the occasional embarrassing radius that had to be reapproached 3 times in front of an audience at a loading dock. Veteran drivers develop what almost amounts to a phantom sense of their own trailer, an awareness of where the back end is at all times, even though it is sitting 60 feet behind them and completely out of the mirrors during certain parts of a turn. Talk to enough experienced drivers and a pattern starts to emerge. Nearly all of them can point to one specific moment, one specific intersection or dock, where the textbook number simply did not prepare them for what actually happened. A driver hauling a long combination through an older industrial district might swing wide entering a turn, following the textbook instinct to give the rear end more room, only to discover that a tight urban corner does not leave room for a wide entry in the first place. Another driver backing into a dock built decades before modern trailer lengths existed learns fast that the manual's clean diagrams assume a world of generous clearances that simply does not exist on half the loading docks in the country. The road teaches lessons that no manual bothers to include, mostly because those lessons are specific to a location, a season, a piece of equipment, or a moment of bad luck that no textbook author could have anticipated. Weather adds another layer that classroom training barely touches. A wet road changes the margin for error on any turn, but it changes the wheelbase equation specifically because a driver has less room to correct a misjudged line without inducing a skid. Snow and ice make the problem worse, since the rear trailer wheels can lose traction independently of the tractor's drive wheels, creating a jackknife risk that has almost nothing to do with speed and almost everything to do with how the driver managed the geometry of the turn in the first place. Veteran drivers who have handled a jackknife scenario or come dangerously close to one develop an entirely different relationship with Wheelbase than someone who has only ever driven that same route in dry summer conditions. Equipment variation compounds the lesson even further. A driver who spends years behind the wheel of a single tractor-trailer combination eventually develops a feel calibrated specifically to that unit's geometry. Move that same driver into a different tractor with a different wheelbase, or hook them up to a different trailer length, and suddenly all of that hard-earned instinct has to be recalibrated. Fleet drivers who rotate between multiple truck configurations often describe a genuine adjustment period every time they climb into an unfamiliar rig, a period where their old instincts are slightly wrong until enough new miles rewrite the internal model. This is precisely why experienced dispatchers try to keep drivers on consistent equipment whenever operational demands allow it. Familiarity with a specific wheelbase is not a minor comfort. It is a real safety factor that shows up in fewer clipped mirrors, fewer curb strikes, and fewer damaged loading dock frames. There is also a piece of this that almost never makes it into formal training at all, and that is the art of reading a turn before committing to it. Veteran drivers scan an intersection or a dock approach well before they reach it, mentally mapping where their rear axle will actually travel, rather than where the front of the cab is pointed. They look for the widest available entry angle. They anticipate obstacles that will only become a problem once the trailer starts tracking inward, and they are willing to take a wider, slower approach, even when it looks unnecessary to everyone watching from the sidewalk. New drivers, trained mostly on textbook geometry, often misjudge this because the manual's clean diagrams do not include the graffiti-covered light pole someone installed 4 feet closer to the curb than the original site plan intended. None of this is meant to diminish the value of classroom training. Every driver needs the formal foundation, the vocabulary, and the baseline understanding of axle geometry before they ever touch a wheel professionally. But there is a reason experienced trainers consistently emphasize supervised road time over additional classroom hours once the basics are covered. Wheelbase behavior is one of those subjects where understanding the concept and possessing the skill are simply not the same achievement, and no amount of additional lecture time closes that particular gap. Only repetition against real obstacles, real weather, and real consequences does that. Manufacturers have tried to soften this learning curve with technology, and to their credit, modern trucks do offer real help. Trailer tracking guidance systems, some now integrated into backup cameras and driver assistance packages, project an estimated path onto a screen showing roughly where the rear wheels will travel through a given turn. These systems are genuinely useful, particularly for newer drivers still building their instincts. But most experienced drivers will tell you the same thing about that technology. It is a helpful backup, not a substitute for the internal model that comes from actually feeling a truck move through thousands of real turns in every condition the road can throw at a person. A screen can suggest a path. It cannot replicate the accumulated pattern recognition of a driver who has felt a rear axle drift wide on wet pavement and adjusted before it became a problem. So the next time you watch an experienced driver take what looks like an unnecessarily wide swing into a turn, understand what you are actually looking at. That is not caution for its own sake, and it is definitely not a lack of confidence. That is a driver running a live calculation their body learned to run automatically, factoring in wheelbase, trailer length, road surface, and every close call that ever taught them the difference between the number printed on a spec sheet and the way a truck actually moves through the world. The manual gives you the formula. The road gives you the judgment. And in this industry, judgment earned the hard way is the one thing no textbook has ever been able to hand a driver for free.